Paul Heyman just chose a side, and it's the side that's going to burn the entire wrestling world to the ground. After months of speculation, after weeks of cryptic promos, after years of loyalty, Paul Heyman finally showed his true colors last night, and it wasn't the colors anyone expected. Roman Reigns didn't just attack Brock Lesnar backstage. He ambushed him like a coward while Paul Heyman held the door shut from the outside. Let that sink in. The tribal chief needed help to take down the beast incarnate, and the special counsel was right there to make sure Brock couldn't escape. This isn't just a betrayal, this is the nuclear option. And if you think WWE didn't just set the stage for the most toxic, most personal, most destructive rivalry in modern wrestling history, then you haven't been paying attention. Because what happened in that backstage area last night wasn't just an attack, it was a declaration of war. And Paul Heyman just picked his general. Let's break down exactly what went down, because the way WWE is trying to spin this on social media is absolutely ridiculous, and we need to talk about what really happened before the revisionist history takes over. Roman Reigns has been on this so-called quest for legacy since he returned at SummerSlam all those years ago. He's beaten everyone. He's held the championship longer than almost anyone in modern WWE history. He's established the bloodline as the most dominant faction we've seen in decades. But there's always been one name that haunted him, one man who Roman could never definitively say he's better than: Brock Lesnar. Sure, they've fought before, multiple times, but every single one of those encounters has had an asterisk next to it. Interference from the Usos, a low blow while the referee was distracted, Jimmy Orgy pulling Brock out of the ring at the last second. Roman has never, and I mean never, beaten Brock Lesnar clean in a straight-up fight, and that's been eating him alive for years. Then comes the Royal Rumble announcement. Brock's back, he's in the Rumble, and suddenly, Roman realizes that all his accomplishments, all his accolades, all his talk about being the greatest of all time means absolutely nothing if Brock Lesnar walks into WrestleMania season and reminds everyone who the real alpha actually is. So what does the tribal chief do? Does he challenge Brock to a face-to-face confrontation? Does he call him out in the ring like a man? Does he use his words, his presence, his supposed superiority to get into Brock's head? No, he waits until Brock is in his locker room, getting ready for a scheduled appearance, and he attacks him from behind like a street thug. But here's where it gets absolutely disgusting. Roman didn't do this alone. Paul Heyman was stationed outside the locker room door, and when Brock tried to escape, when the Beast tried to get out and fight back on his own terms, Paul Heyman, the man who stood by Brock's side for years, the man who called Brock the Conqueror, the advocate who built his entire career on Brock Lesnar's dominance, held that door closed from the outside. Let me repeat that because it's so insane it barely sounds real. Paul Heyman physically prevented Brock Lesnar from escaping while Roman Reigns beat him down with a steel chair. The same Paul Heyman who used to scream, "Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Paul Heyman," before launching into promos about how Brock was an unstoppable force of nature. That Paul Heyman just helped orchestrate an ambush on the man who made him famous in the modern era. Here's my first question for the comments: did Paul Heyman make the right choice, or did he just sign his own death warrant? Because I genuinely want to know what you all think happened when Brock finally gets his hands on the special counsel. Drop your predictions below. Now, WWE is going to try to tell you this is all part of the story. They are going to say Paul made a calculated business decision. They are going to frame this as Paul recognizing that Roman is the future and Brock is the past. They are going to sell you on the idea that the tribal chief needed his wise man to secure his legacy. But that's not what happened. What happened is that Roman Reigns proved he's terrified of Brock Lesnar. What happened is that the so-called head of the table needed assistance to take down a man who was caught completely off guard in his own locker room. What happened is that WWE just told us, in the clearest possible terms, that Roman knows he can't beat Brock in a fair fight. Think about the optics here for a second. Roman has Solo Psycho. He has Tamar Tonga. He has Tonga Loe. He has an entire faction of absolute monsters who could have helped him with this attack. But he didn't call them. He called Paul Heyman. Why? Because Roman needed the one person Brock would never suspect. He needed the ultimate betrayal to make this work. He needed to cut Brock so deep emotionally that the physical damage would be secondary. And that's exactly what happened. The footage shows Brock, after finally breaking through the door and getting away from Roman, not looking angry, not looking violent. He looked hurt, genuinely, emotionally devastated. Because it wasn't just an attack on his body, it was an attack on his trust. Paul Heyman wasn't just his advocate or his manager. Paul was supposed to be his friend. This is where the story gets really interesting, because now we have to ask, what was Paul's motivation? Was this always the plan? Has Paul been playing Brock this entire time, waiting for the perfect moment to turn on him? Or did something happen between them that we don't know about? Did Brock disrespect Paul? Did Roman offer Paul something that Brock couldn't or wouldn't? The WWE universe is split right down the middle on this. Half of you are saying Paul made a smart business decision. He went with the guy who's actually around full-time instead of the guy who shows up 6 times a year. The other half are calling Paul a snake, a traitor, a backstabber who just destroyed his own legacy by turning on the man who legitimized him in the eyes of modern fans. But here's what nobody's talking about. What if Paul didn't have a choice? What if Roman gave him an ultimatum? You're either with me, or you're against me, and if you're against me, the bloodline comes for you. We've seen what the bloodline does to people who defy them. We've seen the attacks, the beatdowns, the systematic destruction of anyone who stands in Roman's way. Maybe Paul looked at his options and realized that betraying Brock was the only way to survive. Or maybe, and this is the theory I'm leaning toward, Paul Heyman is playing the longest con in WWE history. Maybe he's infiltrating Roman's inner circle. Maybe he's gaining Roman's trust so he can destroy the tribal chief from the inside. Maybe this whole thing is Paul's way of giving Brock the ultimate advantage, insider information on Roman's strategies, his weaknesses, his plans. Quick question for you, if Paul Heyman is playing Roman, what's the one piece of information he could give Brock that would guarantee Roman's downfall? Think about it and let me know in the comments, because I have some theories and I want to see if we're on the same page. Now let's talk about what this means for WrestleMania season, because WWE just set up the most personal program they've had in years. This isn't about championships. This isn't about streaks or records or legacies on paper. This is about revenge. This is about betrayal. This is about Brock Lesnar hunting down the 2 men who humiliated him when he was at his most vulnerable. Brock's not going to wait for a scheduled match. He's not going to play by the rules. He's going to show up when WWE least expects it, and he's going to destroy everything in his path until he gets his hands on Roman and Paul. We're talking about Brock at his most dangerous, not the smiling, playful Brock we've seen recently, but the Brock who suplexed John Cena 16 times. The Brock who broke The Undertaker's streak. The Brock who looks at human beings like they are toys he can break for fun. And Roman? Roman's got to be looking over his shoulder every single second from now until WrestleMania, because he might have the numbers advantage. He might have the bloodline backing him up. But when Brock Lesnar decides it's time for payback, none of that's going to matter. We've seen Brock take on multiple people before and walk away standing. The bloodline can't protect Roman from the kind of violence Brock's capable of when he's motivated by genuine anger. Here's where WWE has a chance to do something special. They can tell a story that transcends normal wrestling storytelling. This isn't about good guy versus bad guy. This is about complex characters making morally questionable decisions for reasons that actually make sense. Roman's insecurity about Brock is understandable. Brock is the standard that everyone gets measured against. Paul's self-preservation instinct is human, is not a fighter, is a talker, and aligning with the most powerful force in WWE makes sense for his survival. But Brock's rage, Brock's desire for revenge, that's the most relatable thing in this whole situation. How many of us have been betrayed by someone we trusted? How many of us have been attacked when we were at our most vulnerable? How many of us have watched someone we considered a friend choose someone else over us? Everyone understands what Brock's feeling right now, and that's what's going to make this story so captivating. The real question is, where does this end? Because WWE has painted themselves into an interesting corner. If Roman beats Brock again, even with Paul's help, Roman looks like he needs an army to take down one man. If Brock wins, it undermines everything Roman's built over the past few years. There's no clean ending here. Someone's legacy is going to take a massive hit no matter what happens. My prediction? This ends with Paul Heyman getting his comeuppance from both men. Roman's going to realize Paul's been playing him. Brock's going to realize Paul was never truly loyal to anyone but himself. And Paul's going to end up getting destroyed by the 2 monsters he helped create. It's the only ending that makes sense. The puppet master finally gets his strings cut by the puppets who got tired of dancing. One more question before we wrap this up. What weapon do you think Brock should use when he finally gets his revenge on Roman? A steel chair? The ring steps? Just his bare hands? Let me know in the comments because I love hearing your creative ideas for how this should play out. The bottom line is this: January 11th, 2026 will go down as the night WWE remembered how to tell a story that actually matters. Roman's attack wasn't just a moment, it was a catalyst. Paul's betrayal wasn't just a swerve, it was a character-defining choice. And Brock's pain wasn't just selling, it was real emotion that connected with every single person watching. This is the kind of storytelling that makes wrestling special, when it's done right, when the characters have real motivations, when the stakes actually feel personal. Wrestling transcends entertainment and becomes art. And last night, for better or worse, WWE created a masterpiece of betrayal, violence, and consequences that we're going to be talking about for years. So make sure you smash that like button if you want to see Brock destroy both Roman and Paul. Subscribe if you want weekly breakdowns of how this story develops. And share this video with every wrestling fan you know who needs to understand why last night's attack was the most significant moment of 2026 so far. Because this isn't over, this is just beginning. And when the Beast Incarnate finally unleashes hell on the Tribal Chief and his special council, we're all going to witness something that makes every other rivalry in WWE history look tame by comparison.